Christmas Eve in London. The glass towers of the financial district gleamed like frozen tears against the gray December sky, and I was sitting in my wife's corner office, boxing up the few personal items that made this sterile corporate tomb feel remotely human. A coffee mug from our honeymoon in Scotland, a photo of my daughter Emma from my first marriage, a paperweight shaped like a boxing glove that Oscar had given me as a joke. "Your salary's suspended effective immediately, Keaton." Zara's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel through skin. She slid the HR memo across her glass desk with the same clinical precision she used for everything else in her perfectly orchestrated life. "No bonus, no promotion consideration until you formally apologize to Darren for your inappropriate behavior at the board meeting." Darren Holloway lounged in the leather chair beside her, his Armani suit pressed to perfection, that smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth like he'd just won the lottery. Which, in a way, he had. The chief operating officer of Meridian Security Solutions, heir to old money, and apparently my wife's new favorite plaything. "Merry Christmas indeed," I muttered, wrapping the boxing glove paperweight in tissue paper. That's one way to unwrap betrayal. "What was that?" Zara's ice-blue eyes narrowed. Even after 8 years of marriage, she still had that predatory look that had first attracted me to her at that corporate mixer in Manchester. Back then, I'd mistaken it for ambition. Now I recognized it for what it really was. Hunger. "Nothing, darling." I forced a smile. "Just thinking about how thoughtful you are. Really captures the Christmas spirit." The sarcasm wasn't lost on her, but Zara had built her career on controlling her reactions. She smoothed down her platinum blonde hair and adjusted her designer blazer. "This is a professional decision, Keaton. Your outburst at the board meeting was completely unacceptable. Darren was simply presenting his restructuring proposal, and you—" I questioned the logic of firing 30% of our risk assessment team right before the biggest security contract in company history. I closed the box and stood up, all 6 feet 2 inches of my former military frame unfolding like a challenge. "Forgive me for actually doing my job as risk manager." Darren finally spoke, his posh accent dripping with condescension. "Perhaps if you understood the bigger picture, old boy. This isn't the army anymore. We can't just muscle our way through complex business decisions." I'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before Zara convinced me to leave the military and join her father's company. Pierce Eldro had built Meridian from a small London security firm into a global powerhouse, and marrying his daughter had seemed like a natural progression. Now, standing in this glass cage 40 floors above the Thames, I wondered if I'd traded my soul for a corner office and a company car. "Right." I picked up my box. "Well, I'll just head home then. Enjoy your Christmas strategy session." But I didn't go home. Instead, I took the elevator down to the parking garage and sat in my BMW, staring at the concrete walls and thinking about the encrypted company chat logs I'd discovered 3 days ago. The ones where Darren and Zara discussed removing Keaton from the equation and mocked my pitiful loyalty to a company that clearly saw me as expendable. The ones where they joked about framing me for compliance violations. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the screenshots I'd taken. Darren's messages were particularly charming. The military meathead doesn't have a clue. Zara's got him wrapped around her finger. Once we get rid of him, I can implement the real restructuring plan. And my loving wife's response, "Keaton's usefulness has expired. Time for an upgrade." I sat there in the dim garage lighting, listening to the hum of ventilation fans and the distant rumble of London traffic, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, something colder, more calculating. I opened my laptop and accessed the company's internal systems. My security clearance was still active. They'd suspended my salary but forgotten about my access privileges. Typical corporate incompetence. The emergency transfer clause in my employment contract was still there, buried in subsection 12 of the mobility requirements, a relic from my military days that Pierce had insisted on including. In case of operational necessity or personal emergency, I could trigger an immediate transfer to any Meridian office worldwide, with full relocation compensation and a substantial hardship bonus. I started typing. 20 minutes later, I'd submitted a formal transfer request to our Edinburgh office, citing irreconcilable workplace harassment as the emergency justification. The system automatically approved it, another piece of corporate automation that nobody had bothered to review in years. But that was just the appetizer. I opened a new document and began compiling every piece of evidence I'd gathered over the past month. Screenshots of the chat logs, copies of Darren's expense reports showing company funds used for personal entertainment, records of Zara's motivational emails to staff that bordered on workplace bullying, and the crown jewel, evidence of their plan to manipulate the upcoming security contract bids by eliminating the risk assessment team that would have flagged their preferred vendor's obvious shortcomings. I attached everything to a formal compliance report and sent it directly to the company's legal department, with copies to the board of directors and our external auditors. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Then I walked back upstairs to Zara's office, where she and Darren were still huddled over spreadsheets and champagne. I knocked on the glass door and stepped inside without waiting for permission. "Keaton." Zara looked up, annoyed. "I thought you'd gone home." "Just wanted to let you know I've accepted that transfer to Edinburgh. Effective immediately." I placed a single sheet of paper on her desk. "My resignation from this office, and my formal notice of the emergency relocation clause activation. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories." The color drained from her face as she read the document. "You can't be serious. This is Christmas Eve. The transfer department isn't even already approved." I smiled. Amazing what you can accomplish with the right security clearance and a thorough understanding of company policy. Darren leaned forward, his smugness replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Now see here, Marin, you can't just—" "Actually, I can." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Zara? You might want to check your email in the morning. Legal's going to have some questions about those compliance issues." I walked out, leaving them staring after me in stunned silence. At 5 a.m. on Christmas morning, my phone started ringing. First Zara, then Darren, then Pierce himself. I ignored them all, sitting in my flat with a cup of coffee and watching the sunrise paint the London skyline in shades of gold and crimson. The moving company arrived at 7, professional and efficient. By noon, my entire life was packed into boxes and loaded onto a truck bound for Scotland. I left only one thing behind, a note on the kitchen counter of the home I'd shared with Zara for 5 years. "Enjoy your reorg. Merry Christmas. K." As I drove north toward Edinburgh, my phone buzzed with a text from Pierce. "Please tell me you didn't send those files to legal." I smiled and turned off the phone. The real Christmas present was just beginning to unwrap itself. Edinburgh in winter was like stepping into a noir film directed by someone with a sense of humor. Gray stone buildings hunched against the cold like guilty secrets, and the wind off the North Sea cut through my coat with surgical precision. I'd rented a flat in the Old Town, close enough to Meridian's Scottish office to maintain the pretense of my transfer, but far enough from London to plan my next moves without interference. The company had tried to spin my departure as a mutual decision for operational efficiency, but word travels fast in the corporate world. Within a week, I was getting calls from former colleagues, some sympathetic, others clearly fishing for gossip. "Heard you and Zara had a falling out," said James Morrison, one of the senior analysts I'd worked with for 3 years. "Shame, really. Though between you and me, mate, some of us saw this coming." "Oh, really?" I was sitting in a pub near Edinburgh Castle, nursing a pint and watching tourists take selfies in the snow. "What gave it away?" The way she looked at Darren during meetings, like a cat eyeing a particularly fat mouse. James lowered his voice. Plus, there's been talk about the restructuring plan. A lot of the lads think it's mental. Cutting risk assessment right before the Thornfield contract. The Thornfield contract. £100 million security deal with a consortium of London banks. The kind of contract that could make or break careers, and the perfect opportunity for someone to skim a substantial commission by recommending the right vendor. Well, I said, I'm sure Darren knows what he's doing. Right. James's tone suggested he thought otherwise. Anyway, heard from Emma lately? How's she taking the separation? My daughter, 15 years old, sharp as a blade, and currently spending her Christmas holiday with her mother in Manchester. I'd managed to avoid explaining the details of my marital situation, but teenagers have a talent for reading between the lines. She's fine, I lied. Looking forward to university applications next year. After James rang off, I sat in the pub and considered my options. I could stay in Edinburgh, do my job, and let Zara and Darren destroy themselves with their own incompetence. It would be the mature, professional thing to do. Or I could remind them why you should never corner a man who's got nothing left to lose and a very specific set of skills acquired over 2 decades of military and corporate warfare. I chose option 2. The first step was intelligence gathering. I called Oscar Brennan, my old army buddy who'd transitioned from military police to private investigation work. If anyone could dig up dirt on Darren Halloway, it was Oscar. Keaton, you magnificent bastard. Oscar's voice boomed through the phone. Heard you finally grew a spine and left that ice queen. About time. Need a favor, Oscar. Background check on someone. Thorough and discreet. This about the wife's boyfriend? How did you... Please. I've been waiting for this call since your wedding. Send me his details. While Oscar worked his magic, I focused on the corporate battlefield. I still had friends inside Meridian, people who'd been overlooked for promotion or marginalized by Zara's management style. It was time to activate that network. Mira Callan, the HR director, had always been professional but distant. I'd assumed she was part of Zara's inner circle, but a carefully worded email about ongoing concerns regarding workplace dynamics got an interesting response. Mr. Marin, she wrote back, I'd be interested in discussing your observations about recent organizational changes. Perhaps we could arrange a confidential consultation. Interesting. Very interesting. The second phase of my plan kicked off the following week, when Meridian held its annual New Year strategy meeting. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I had other ways of staying informed. Sarah Chen, one of the junior risk analysts who'd survived Darren's cuts, called me afterward. Keaton, you're not going to believe what happened at the meeting. Try me. Darren presented his restructuring plan, right? And when Pierce asked about risk assessment for the Thornfield contract, Darren said they'd handle it internally. No external audits, no independent verification, just his team's analysis. And Pierce accepted that? He looked uncomfortable, but Zara backed Darren completely. Said the external audits were an unnecessary expense. Sarah paused. But here's the weird part. After the meeting, I overheard Pierce talking to his assistant. He asked her to pull all the files on the original risk assessment protocols, the ones you wrote. I smiled, staring out at Edinburgh's medieval skyline. Did he now? Keaton, what's really going on? There are rumors about compliance investigations, and people are saying you filed some kind of report before you left. Just following proper procedures, Sarah, making sure all the paperwork was in order. That evening, Oscar called with his preliminary findings on Darren. Your boy's got expensive tastes and a gambling problem, he said. Owes about £50,000 to some very unfriendly people. Been using company credit cards for personal expenses, and I've got photos of him using the company car for what I'll diplomatically call romantic meetings with various women who aren't your wife. How many women? 3 that I can confirm, including his personal assistant and someone from the marketing department. Real charmer, this one. I leaned back in my chair, processing the information. Anything else? Oh, this is the best part. Remember that team-building weekend in the Cotswolds last month? The one where Darren gave that presentation about corporate loyalty and professional ethics? Vaguely. He spent the entire weekend in his room with Zara. Separate from the group activities, the hotel staff remember them quite clearly. So they'd been carrying on for at least 2 months, probably longer, while I was working 60-hour weeks trying to shore up the company's security protocols. My wife was conducting her own private merger with the COO. Oscar, I need you to document everything. Photos, receipts, witness statements, but keep it quiet for now. Planning something devious, are we? Just preparing for the annual performance review. The third phase began when Emma called me, crying. Dad, I heard something at school today. Rebecca's mom works at Meridian, and she said people are talking about you and Zara getting divorced. She said you had some kind of breakdown and got fired. My daughter's voice was small and hurt, and I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Emma, listen to me. Your stepmother and I are having some difficulties, but I didn't have a breakdown and I wasn't fired. I took a transfer to Edinburgh because I needed some space to think. But why is everyone saying you're unstable? Rebecca said her mum heard that you threatened people at work. I closed my eyes, imagining Zara's carefully orchestrated whisper campaign, controlling the narrative, protecting her reputation while destroying mine. Sometimes, sweetheart, when people do things they're ashamed of, they try to make the other person look like the villain. It's easier than admitting they were wrong. Are you and Zara really getting divorced? I don't know yet, but whatever happens, it won't change how much I love you. After Emma rang off, I sat in my flat and stared at the walls. They'd crossed a line, involving my daughter in their corporate games, making her ashamed of her father to cover their own tracks. That's when I stopped thinking about justice and started planning revenge. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Mira Callan. Miss Callan, I believe it's time we had that confidential consultation. I have some additional information that might interest you regarding recent organizational changes. Are you available for a secure conversation? Her response came back within an hour. Very available. And Mr. Marin, I think you'll find we have more in common than you might expect. The game was about to change. Mira Callan met me at a small cafe in Edinburgh's Grassmarket, far from any Meridian offices or corporate surveillance. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that gets overlooked in corporate environments dominated by men like Darren and Pierce. Mr. Marin, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. Thank you for reaching out. I've been hoping someone would. Someone would what? Challenge what's happening at Meridian, the culture Zara and Darren are creating. She stirred her coffee slowly, choosing her words carefully. I've been HR director for 4 years. I've watched them systematically eliminate anyone who questions their decisions or threatens their authority. Including me. You were just the most recent casualty. Mira leaned forward. Do you know why I really requested this meeting? I waited. Because 3 other employees have filed informal complaints about workplace harassment in the past 6 months, all involving Darren, all mysteriously withdrawn or dismissed as misunderstandings. Let me guess, young women on his team. His assistant, Jennifer Walsh, a marketing coordinator named Lisa Barnes, and most recently, a junior analyst in the risk department. Mira's voice was steady, but I could see the anger in her eyes. Darren has a pattern. He targets women who need their jobs, who can't afford to make waves. He makes their work lives miserable until they either submit to his advances or quit. And Zara knows? Zara enables it. She's so focused on protecting her position and advancing Darren's career that she's willing to sacrifice anyone who gets in the way. Mira pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of emails. These are from her personal account to Darren. I obtained them through a legitimate HR investigation into workplace harassment claims. I read through the messages, my jaw tightening with each line. Zara discussing which employees were problems that needed to be managed, strategies for discrediting anyone who challenged Darren's authority, and most damning of all, explicit discussions about framing me for compliance violations to justify my removal. "This is conspiracy," I said. "It's also actionable under employment law. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" I looked at Mira across the small table, this woman who'd been fighting the same battle from inside the system while I'd been playing the loyal soldier. "What do you want to do about it?" She smiled, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt like I had an ally. "I want to watch them burn." The plan we developed over the next 2 hours was elegant in its simplicity. Mira would continue her official HR investigation into workplace harassment, building an airtight legal case against Darren. Meanwhile, I would work from the outside, using my industry contacts and insider knowledge to undermine their credibility with clients and partners. "The Thornfield contract presentation is next week," Mira said. "Darren's betting everything on landing that deal. If something were to go wrong..." "What kind of something?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe if the client received some anonymous information about Meridian's recent organizational changes, questions about our risk assessment capabilities, concerns about leadership stability." I grinned. That would be unfortunate. Tragic, really. Phase 1 launched the following Monday. I'd spent the weekend crafting a detailed analysis of Meridian's security protocols, highlighting the gaps created by Darren's restructuring. Nothing libelous or false, just a professional assessment of how the recent changes had compromised the company's ability to deliver on major contracts. I sent copies to 3 people: the procurement director at Thornfield Financial, a journalist who covered the security industry for the Financial Times, and Pierce Eldro himself. The response was immediate. Pierce called me within an hour. "Keaton, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "Protecting the company's reputation, Pierce, just like you taught me." "By undermining the leadership team?" "By pointing out that the leadership team is undermining itself." I was walking along Edinburgh's Royal Mile, tourists streaming past me in the January cold. When Thornfield asks why Meridian eliminated its risk assessment department right before bidding on the biggest security contract in company history, what are you going to tell them? Silence on the other end of the line. "Pierce, I've got nothing against you personally. You gave me a chance when I left the military, and I'm grateful. But your daughter and her boyfriend are going to destroy everything you've built. Darren's a good man, Keaton. And Zara's my daughter. Darren's a predator who's using company resources to fund his gambling debts and his affairs. And Zara's so blinded by ambition that she can't see he's playing her." Another long pause. "You have proof of these allegations?" "I have documentation, photographs, witness statements. And if you don't believe me, ask Mira Callan about the HR complaints she's been investigating." I hung up before he could respond. Phase 2 kicked off that afternoon when Oscar called with an update on his surveillance. "Your boy Darren's been busy," he said. "Had lunch with a gentleman named Vincent Torres yesterday. Mr. Torres runs a security firm called Blackwater Solutions. Very expensive, very exclusive, and coincidentally, the front runner for the Thornfield contract." "Interesting lunch conversation?" "They discussed commission structures and profit-sharing arrangements. I've got audio recordings." "Legal recordings?" "Completely legal. They were sitting at an outdoor cafe in Covent Garden, public space, no expectation of privacy. Send me everything." The audio files Oscar sent were devastating. Darren and Torres discussing how to structure their kickback arrangement, how to hide the inflated costs from Thornfield's procurement team, and most damning of all, how Darren had eliminated Meridian's risk assessment department specifically to prevent them from flagging Torres's company's obvious shortcomings. I forwarded the recordings to Mira, along with a simple message: "For your investigation files." Her response came back immediately. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Phase 3 was more personal. I drove back to London that weekend, ostensibly to collect some belongings from the house I'd shared with Zara. She wasn't there, probably spending the weekend at Darren's flat, but I wasn't really there for my things anyway. I was there to plant seeds. I left copies of Darren's expense reports in places where Zara would find them. His gambling receipts tucked into her jewelry box, photos of him with other women slipped between the pages of her favorite books. Nothing dramatic or obvious, just enough to make her start asking questions. Then I visited 3 people, Jennifer Walsh, Lisa Barnes, and the junior analyst whose name I'd learned was Rebecca Stone. All 3 women who'd filed harassment complaints against Darren, all 3 who'd been pressured to withdraw them. I didn't threaten anyone or make promises I couldn't keep. I simply let them know that someone was finally taking their complaints seriously, and that they had legal options if they chose to pursue them. "Mr. Marin," Jennifer said when I met her at a coffee shop near her flat, "I need this job. I can't afford to make trouble. I understand, but you also can't afford to let him destroy your career and your self-respect." I slid a business card across the table. "This is an employment lawyer who specializes in harassment cases. She works on contingency, so you wouldn't pay anything unless you win." "What if I lose? What if they fire me?" "Jennifer, they're going to fire you anyway. Darren doesn't keep women around once they've served their purpose. At least this way, you go down fighting." By Sunday evening, all 3 women had contacted the lawyer. I was driving back to Edinburgh when my phone rang. Zara's name appeared on the display. "Hello, darling." "You bastard." Her voice was ice-cold fury. "What did you do to Darren's car?" I smiled. Oscar had been busy while I was making social calls. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I've been in Edinburgh all weekend." Someone spray-painted cheater across his Porsche, in the parking garage of his building. Security cameras show a man in a hoodie, but the angle's too poor to make an identification. How unfortunate. Vandalism is such a problem in London these days. "This is you, Keaton. I know it's you." "Zara, I'm 300 miles away. How could it possibly be me?" I paused for effect. Although, if someone did vandalize Darren's car, maybe they knew something you don't. The line went quiet. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all, sweetheart. I'm sure Darren's been completely faithful to you, just like he was to his wife before you came along." I hung up and turned off the phone. The real fireworks were just beginning. The call came at 6 in the morning on Thursday. Pierce's voice was strained, older than I'd ever heard it. "Keaton, we need to talk. All of us. Today." "All of us?" "You, me, Zara, Darren, and Mira. There's a situation." I was already awake, sitting in my Edinburgh flat with coffee and the morning papers. The Financial Times had run a small piece about leadership questions at Meridian Security, and the Thornfield contract announcement had been mysteriously delayed. "What kind of situation, Pierce?" "The kind that could destroy this company if we don't handle it properly." His voice cracked slightly. "The board's calling an emergency meeting. There are questions about compliance violations, harassment claims, and financial irregularities." "Sounds serious." "Don't play games with me, boy. I know you started this avalanche. The question is whether you're willing to help us stop it before it buries all of us." I considered his words. Pierce had been like a father to me when I first joined Meridian. He'd taught me the security business, trusted me with major clients, and welcomed me into his family. But his daughter had made her choice, and so had he by backing her play. "Where do you want to meet?" "The Athenaeum Club. Private dining room. 2 o'clock. The Athenaeum was old London money, the kind of place where deals were made over brandy and cigars while the rest of the world waited outside. I'd been there twice before, both times as Pierce's guest for client meetings. Walking through those mahogany-paneled halls felt like entering a museum dedicated to British imperial power. Pierce was waiting in a small dining room overlooking Pall Mall, looking every one of his 72 years. His usually immaculate silver hair was disheveled, and his Savile Row suit seemed to hang loose on his frame. "Keaton." He stood to shake my hand, and I noticed the tremor in his fingers. "Thank you for coming." "Of course." We sat in uncomfortable silence until the others arrived. Zara entered first, her armor of professional composure intact, but showing stress fractures around the edges. Her makeup was perfect, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Darren followed, looking like a man who'd been sleeping poorly. His usual swagger was replaced by nervous energy, and he kept checking his phone as if expecting bad news. Mira came last, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of professional neutrality that didn't fool anyone. "Right," Pierce said once we were all seated. "Let's dispense with pleasantries. Mira, would you care to brief us on the current situation?" Mira opened her portfolio and consulted her notes. "As of this morning, Meridian is facing 3 separate legal actions. First, a formal employment tribunal hearing regarding harassment, claims filed by 3 current employees. Second, a compliance investigation by the Financial Conduct Authority regarding potential kickback arrangements on the Thornfield contract. Third, a civil lawsuit filed by Blackwater Solutions claiming defamation and tortious interference with business relationships." Darren's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. We haven't even signed the Thornfield contract yet." "No," Mira said calmly, "but you have been recorded discussing kickback arrangements with Vincent Torres. Those recordings are now in the hands of the FCA, the Serious Fraud Office, and Thornfield's legal department." The silence that followed was deafening. "How?" Zara's voice was barely a whisper. "Professional surveillance," I said. "Completely legal. Public spaces. No expectation of privacy." All eyes turned to me. Pierce looked devastated, Zara furious, Darren terrified. "You orchestrated this entire thing," Zara said. "I documented what was already happening. The harassment, the financial irregularities, the conspiracy to defraud clients. I just made sure the right people knew about it." "You destroyed us." "No, darling. You destroyed yourselves. I just held up a mirror." Darren finally found his voice. "This is insane. Keaton's obviously having some kind of breakdown. He's been stalking me, vandalizing my property, spreading lies." "Show them the photos, Mira." Mira slid a manila envelope across the table. Darren's face crumpled as he saw the surveillance photos of his various affairs, the documentation of his gambling debts, the evidence of his expense account fraud. "These aren't lies, Darren. These are facts. Documented, verifiable facts." Pierce picked up one of the photos, Darren entering a hotel with his assistant, and stared at it for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with something I'd never seen before. Disappointment so profound it looked like grief. "Zara," he said quietly, "did you know about any of this?" My wife, soon to be ex-wife, looked at her father, then at Darren, then at the evidence scattered across the mahogany table. For a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw the scared little girl beneath the corporate ice queen. It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I said. "Darren's been using company resources to fund his lifestyle and his affairs. You've been covering for him because you thought he was your ticket to the top, and both of you decided I was expendable." "That's not true." "Really?" I pulled out my phone and played one of the audio recordings Oscar had captured. Zara's voice filled the room. "Keaton's usefulness has expired. Time for an upgrade." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Pierce closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. "How bad is it, Mira? Worst case scenario." "The harassment claims alone could cost us millions in settlements and legal fees. The FCA investigation could result in criminal charges and the loss of our operating licenses. And if Thornfield pulls out of the contract, we'll lose our biggest client and probably several others." And best case? We cut our losses. Darren resigns immediately and accepts full responsibility for his actions. Zara steps down from her executive role pending the investigation. We cooperate fully with all regulatory inquiries and hope we can salvage enough of the company's reputation to survive. Darren shot to his feet. I'm not taking the fall for this alone. Zara knew about everything. Sit down and shut up. Pierce's voice carried the authority of 5 decades in business. You've done enough damage. But Darren was past caring about authority or consequences. You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I was skimming money from the Torres deal. Yes, I was having affairs. But Zara was right there with me every step of the way. She knew about the kickbacks, she approved the expense reports, and she personally signed off on eliminating the risk assessment team. The room erupted. Zara screaming at Darren, Pierce shouting for order, Mira taking notes with professional detachment. I just sat back and watched my carefully constructed plan reach its crescendo. Enough! Pierce's voice cut through the chaos. Enough! This is over. Darren, you're fired. Security will escort you from the building within the hour. Zara, you're suspended pending the investigation. And Keaton... He turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Keaton, I don't know whether to thank you or have you arrested. I vote for thank you, I said. I just saved your company from a fraud scandal that would have destroyed it completely. By destroying my daughter's career and my son-in-law. By exposing what they were already doing. Pierce, if I hadn't acted, how long do you think it would have taken before the FCA discovered the kickback scheme on their own? How many more women would Darren have harassed? How much more money would they have stolen? Pierce stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. God help me. You're absolutely right. Darren made one last desperate play. You can't do this to me. My father's got connections, influence. I'll destroy all of you. Your father, I said calmly, disowned you 6 months ago when he found out about your gambling debts. I checked. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. As security escorted Darren from the building, Zara turned to me with tears streaming down her face. Why, Keaton? Why did you have to destroy everything? I looked at this woman I'd loved for 8 years, this stranger who'd been willing to sacrifice me for her own ambition, and felt nothing but pity. Because you forgot something important, Zara. You forgot that I'm very good at my job, and my job is identifying threats and neutralizing them before they can cause damage. I stood up and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Pierce asked. Back to Edinburgh. I have a company to run. What company? I smiled. Didn't I mention? Thornfield offered me a consulting contract this morning. Seems they need someone to overhaul their security protocols. Someone with experience identifying corporate fraud and workplace harassment. I left them sitting in that mahogany-paneled room, surrounded by the wreckage of their ambitions, and walked out into the London afternoon feeling lighter than I had in years. The war was over. I'd won. But the best part was still to come. 3 months later, I was standing in Thornfield Financial's gleaming conference room, presenting my final report on Meridian Security's systematic failures, when my phone buzzed with a text from Oscar. Turn on Channel 4 News. You're going to love this. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, pulling up the news app on my phone. The headline made me smile. Meridian Security Executives Charged in Fraud Scandal. The reporter was standing outside the Old Bailey, explaining how Darren Holloway had been arrested that morning on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The camera cut to footage of him being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of defeat. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was the follow-up story about how 3 women had come forward with harassment allegations, leading to a broader investigation into Meridian's corporate culture. Jennifer Walsh, Lisa Barnes, and Rebecca Stone were finally getting their day in court, and their lawyer, the one I'd recommended, was painting a picture of systematic abuse that had been covered up by senior management, including Zara. My phone rang. Pierce's name appeared on the display. Keaton, thank God. I need your help. Hello, Pierce. Saw the news. Congratulations on finally cleaning house. This is a disaster. The board's talking about selling the company. Our stock price has collapsed. We're hemorrhaging clients. I walked to the window and looked out at the London skyline, thinking about how much had changed since Christmas Eve. What do you want from me, Pierce? Come back. Help me rebuild. You know this business better than anyone, and you've got the trust of clients like Thornfield. I'll make you COO, give you whatever salary you want. What about Zara? A long pause. Zara's no longer with the company. The board felt it was best, given the circumstances. And the harassment investigation? She's cooperating fully with authorities. Her lawyer thinks she can avoid criminal charges if she testifies against Darren. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Pierce, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in coming back to Meridian. Then what do you want? Name your price. I don't want anything from you, Pierce. I've got my own consultancy now, my own clients. I'm doing just fine. Which was true. Word had spread quickly through London's financial district about the security expert who'd exposed the Meridian scandal. My phone hadn't stopped ringing with offers from banks, insurance companies, and government agencies who wanted someone to audit their security protocols and corporate culture. I'd also received a call from Emma, who'd seen the news coverage and finally understood what had really happened during those dark days after Christmas. Dad, I'm sorry I doubted you, she'd said. I know now that you were just trying to do the right thing. It's okay, sweetheart. Sometimes doing the right thing looks like the wrong thing until all the facts come out. Are you happy now? I mean, really happy? I'd thought about that question for a long time. Was I happy? Or was I just satisfied with my revenge? I'm at peace, I'd told her. For the first time in years, I'm at peace. Now, standing in Thornfield's offices, I realized that was still true. The anger that had consumed me since Christmas Eve was gone, replaced by something calmer but no less powerful: purpose. I finished my call with Pierce and returned to the conference room, where Thornfield's executives were waiting for my final recommendations. Gentlemen, I said, based on my investigation into Meridian Securities practices, I recommend we terminate our contract with them immediately and implement a comprehensive vendor screening process to prevent similar issues in the future. And who would you recommend to handle our security needs? Asked the procurement director. I smiled. As it happens, I know just the company. 6 months after that, Keaton Marin Security Consultants had 15 employees, offices in London and Edinburgh, and a client list that included half the major financial institutions in the UK. We specialized in corporate security audits, with particular expertise in identifying fraud, harassment, and other forms of workplace misconduct. Mira Callan had joined as my head of HR and compliance. Oscar ran our investigation division. Jennifer Walsh, Lisa Barnes, and Rebecca Stone all worked for us now, having discovered that their experiences with workplace harassment made them uniquely qualified to help other companies create safer, more professional environments. We were profitable, growing, and making a real difference in the lives of people who'd been victimized by corporate predators like Darren Holloway. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that justice had been served. Darren was sentenced to 4 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. His wife had divorced him and taken half of what little assets he had left. His father's connections couldn't save him from the consequences of his actions. Zara avoided criminal charges by testifying against him, but her career in the security industry was over. The last I heard, she was working for a small consulting firm in Manchester, making a fraction of what she'd earned at Meridian. Pierce had managed to sell what was left of Meridian to a German conglomerate for about 20% of what it had been worth before the scandal. He retired to his estate in the Cotswolds, a broken man who'd learned too late that family loyalty has its limits. As for me, I was sitting in my Edinburgh office on a rainy Thursday afternoon, reviewing proposals for a new government contract, when Emma called. "Dad, I got into Cambridge, early admission to read law." "That's fantastic, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." "I want to specialize in employment law, help people who've been treated unfairly at work." I smiled, thinking about how the events of the past year had shaped not just my life, but my daughter's future as well. "I think you'll be excellent at that." "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret what you did? I mean, destroying Zara's career and everything?" I looked out at the Edinburgh skyline, thinking about Christmas Eve and the choice I'd made in that parking garage. The choice between accepting humiliation and fighting back. "Emma, there's something important you need to understand about life. Sometimes people will try to destroy you not because you've done anything wrong, but because you're in their way. When that happens, you have two choices. You can let them win, or you can remind them why they should have left you alone in the first place. And you chose option 2. I chose to protect myself and the people who couldn't protect themselves. Darren was a predator, Zara was his enabler, and if I hadn't stopped them, they would have kept hurting people. So you don't regret it?" I thought about Darren in his prison cell, about Zara's destroyed reputation, about Pierce's broken dreams. I thought about the 3 women who now had careers instead of trauma, about the clients who trusted us to keep them safe, about the satisfaction of building something good from the ashes of betrayal. "No, sweetheart, I don't regret it at all." After Emma hung up, I returned to my work, but my mind kept drifting back to that Christmas Eve confrontation. The moment when Zara had slid that HR memo across her glass desk and thought she was ending my career. She'd been right about one thing. It was the end of my old life. But it was also the beginning of something much better. Outside my window, the Edinburgh rain was turning to snow, and I could see tourists taking pictures of the castle. My phone was ringing with calls from potential clients. My team was working on cases that would make a real difference in people's lives. I'd started this journey wanting revenge, but I'd ended up with something more valuable: redemption. And in a world full of corporate predators,